The Rebbe explains now that essentially um, it's all about tshuva. Tshuva means to bring back. The question is, there's two things that we're bringing back. When you do mitzvahs, then you bring the sparks back to their source. Uh, the tshuva of a person brings back his neshama back to his source. So tshuva and ma'asim tovim are really all bringing back to the source. And the shaila is, what is more advantageous? Is the advantageous certain areas is to bring the neshama back to its source, and in certain areas it's to bring the sparks, because the whole purpose of creation is to elevate the spark. Let's look inside. So the point, the explanation, we can say, actually, both is tshuva. Side tshuva. Ma'asim tovim is also in essence tshuva. Hainu. Shegam ma'asim tovim in yonamu tshuva. Also, ma'asim tovim is tshuva. Da'yidei kiyum hamitzvahs. Through observance of mitzvahs. So that's a mamish a mitzvah, but also ba'al derech zeh al yidei ha'avodah d'chol masecha yu l'shem shomayim. When all, as the pasuk says, all what you do should be l'shem shomayim. So all your deeds really become, in a way, a purpose for shomayim, in a way of mitzvah. And how much more so in all your ways, meaning even in your ways, which is in the rochecha, to know Hashem. That means you're taking mundane things, you're taking maasecha, and you're taking even the rochecha, and you're finding Hashem even in them. That means that you're taking out the sparks from even the areas. They're not even a mitzvah. These are maasecha, this is the rochecha. Still, poidim es nitzotzes hakadoshos. We are able to redeem the holy sparks from Devarim Agashmim that are in the physical matters. Umashivim umaylim oisum l'shorshim. We return them to shuva, meaning we return them and we elevate them back to the root. Elo. So what's the difference between tshuva and ma'asim tovim? Elo tshuva hi tshuva da neshama. Tshuva is the shuva da neshama. Hashavas haneshama lemekoyro v'shorshim. That's bringing the soul back to its source and root. V'haruach toshuv el ha'alikim asher nesana. The spirit that returns to Hashem that gave it. Umaisim toivim hu hatshuva da nitzutza shebayom. And maisim toivim, that's bringing back the sparks that are in the world. So the neshama and the sparks in the world. When we say in the world, that includes also the spark in the person's body and his animal souls. Those are part of the world nitzutzis. How are they sorted out and how is they elevated? Their elevation is through the act of mitzvahs, which is ma'asim tovim. And this is when we say that there is 1 hour of tshuva ma'asim tovim in this world. In this world, all this elevation can take place. Both of the side tshuva, side ma'asim tovim ba'olam hazeh, it's in this world that we can elevate. Ki inyan ha'tshuva, because the idea of tshuva da neshama, or tshuva da nitzutzis, both the tshuva of the soul and the nitzutzis, ma'asim tovim, ki ba'olam hazeh dafke is dafke in this world. This is the reason for the descent of the neshama below, so that there should be the idea of teshuva in the soul, in the gashmis, in everything, that when the neshama comes down, there can be now tshuva. That's the soul. The beyoisol l'maylo b'madreges tzaddik. When the soul is above, it's on the level of a tzaddik. Through the descent below, it comes now the idea of tshuva. So you get a higher level by coming down, because now that you get the level of tshuva, even tzaddikim gemurim can't stand there, which means you attain a higher level through the descent of the neshama lamato. Also, same thing is true for the sparks when they come down below. Through sorting them out and elevating them, the idea of the tshuva of the nitzotzes, they are elevated to a higher level than they were before the descent. So you have a high level of tshuva, the neshama gets higher, and all the sparks through coming down get higher. So we can now explain the two interpretation in the Yofesh Achas b'tshuva ma'asim tovim, that tshuva comes before ma'asim tovim. Im ha'ikar hu ma'asim tovim is the main thing ma'asim tovim, but tshuva yagdoma l'ma'asim tovim. So the main thing is ma'asim tovim, but the tshuva is in order to make it ma'asim tovim, but it's all about ma'asim tovim. Or we're saying that it comes for gam kedima b'mayla, it's a kedima b'mayla in advantage. Ki ba'ilui the tshuva l'gabe tzadikim kamanyon, because in the advantage of tshuva to tzadikim there's several aspects. Yeshnom, so when the tshuva l'gabe tzadikim, if you want to measure what's the advantage of tshuva, there are several aspects. Yeshnom inyonim sheikrom hu b'tshuva d'neshama, certain matters which is mainly in the tshuva of the neshama. Umitzad inyonim elu, and from that aspect, tshuva d'neshama, b'demes b'mayla l'maisim tovim tshuva d'netzotzos. Then there is a advantage of the tshuva of the neshama. Then the shavach of the tshuva before b'maisim tovim. Yeshnom inyonim sheikrom hu b'tshuva d'netzotzos. But there's some which is the mainly is the netzotzos. And from that is ma'asim tovim. So then is the tshuva is only hakdama to the ma'asim tovim, because the main advantage is the ma'asim tovim, according to them. Nice Gimel and on, the Rebbe is explaining now the different advantages of the level of teshuva that takes place by the neshama. And the Rebbe is going to say there are three aspects to it. And then the Rebbe says there is also, similarly, there is also three aspects in the tshuva that takes place in the ma'asim tovim in the netzutzes by bringing them back. The advantages that takes place after they come down to go ahead and bring the sparks back to their source. And therefore we understand the inyonim that there is sometimes there is an advantage of the neshamas in a certain area. There is the advantage of the neshamas return to its source, and in certain areas there is an advantage of the sparks going to its source, as the Rebbe will go on to explain now. We'll understand it by introducing Ilui the tshuva kipshuta tshuva alavedus, explaining first the advantage of literal tshuva when you do tshuva for sins. The Rebbe will explain there is tshuva, the neshama that comes down is brought up to its source. That's a level of teshuva. But literal tshuva means when you violated and you went against Hashem. And that's where, in that level of teshuva, we find the real elevation, as the Rebbe explained. So when a person does an Aveda and then he does Shuvah, so there is three aspects that the Rebbe discusses what happens in the service and the advantage after you do tshuva. Number one, Aleph. Shatzimoin lelakuz de baalei tshuva utzimoin godl yeser ma'atzimoin de tzadikim. The thirst to godliness of a Baal Tshuva is a greater thirst than the thirst of tzaddikim. Tzaddikim thirst for Hashem, but the thirst of Baal Tshuva is a greater level. Why is it more thirst? Because since previously they were far, that's why their thirst is greater. Because the further you are, the greater the thirst. So about Tshuva, who violated, has a greater thirst Hashem. As explained in Tanya, then there is a ''tšmא', there's a ''tšmא'. Obeys number two, and number two advantage of what takes place by Abal Tshuva. Because before they do Tshuva, they were far, they were distant from Hashem. So then the light and the pleasure of above through that takes place through Tshuva, that is greater than the delight and the pleasure of doing mitzvahs of Avodas HaTzadikim, which the Eibishter says, Nachas Ruach Lefonai, Shamarti V'Nasir Etzoni, that the Eibishter gets pleasure anytime you do what Hashem wants, even a tzaddik. But the fact that the person who is distant first, and he returns, that's a greater pleasure. As we know, the moshul, that when you're far, and you come close, is a greater delight. A son of a king who was distant from his father, the king, till he ended up in captivity. Once he goes out of captivity and he comes to his father, the king, their delight and the joy of their Shaben HaMelech v'Shel HaMelech, of the son of the king and the king, who godel harbe yoser mahatainu v'asimcha shoyo koidem defnation nisrachik. So that's much greater than the delight and the joy that was before they were distant, meaning that a father and a son, the king and his son, who were always together, and they have the delight. So that was there, but the delight that they get when he comes out of captivity and he comes back is much greater than the original delight. That was there before he was delivered. The Iker Tainug v'Hasimcha, because the main delight and joy is from close that it comes after being in a distance. So therefore, Abal Tshuva, who was distant, and then he comes to Hashem, there's a greater delight. That's the second advantage of Abal Tshuva. Number one is the thirst of the Avodah of Abal Tshuva is greater because he was far away. There's a greater tzimoin like in the Tanya. Also, the second thing is that the pleasure, nachas ruach, from somebody who was far is greater than somebody that's always by the king. Coming out of Shivya is a greater delight and a greater joy. That's the dilemma about Tshuva. And a third matter, V'gimel, Avodas Tshuva, he b'derech dilug, shaloi b'seder v'adroga. Tshuva is in a way of jump over. It's not in an orderly, not step by step. That he changes and becomes a new entity. B'loshna Rambam, to use Loshna Rambam, ani achar v'ani eini oisai ish, she'oso oisum ha'maisim. The Rambam talks about tshuva, that the person changes himself. He says, I'm someone else. After he did tshuva, I'm not that person that committed the sin. Didn't do any of those things. So, which means he becomes another. It's a total change. By chidush zeh the ha'adam, through this change in the person, that it becomes like a new person, nasa chidush gam ba'olam, that creates a novelty also in the world. That the sins turn into merits. That's the change, that there were a sin, actually committed a sin, they were as doinus, and now they become zochis. There's a change of mitzias. The person changes his mitzias through tshuva, and there's a change of this doinus, they become zochis. Also from the fact that there's such a change, this also creates a tremendous delight above. The ikir hatainug u'medover chodesh davke, because the real delight is when it comes from something new. The known mashal, to point out the known mashal, a bird that speaks. A person that speaks, there's no big deal. You don't make a display. You don't make a circus out of that. But when you have a tzipper, you have a bird speaking, that's a big chiddush. So because the joy that people see is when people do something when it's out of their nature. Tzipper normally doesn't talk, and now that it talks. So for the Baal Tshuva, who changes around and becomes something different, this is not the expect. That brings a great delight. The delight from the change, the delight from the fact that he comes from a distance, and the strength with which he returns, which is number one, to Hashem. That's when we talk about literal tshuva. But doesn't mean that a person needs to do literal tshuva, that it's expected for him to do sins and do tshuva. A person technically has to have this level, being a tzaddik. And we'll see that even by a person who's a tzaddik has the three levels of tshuva, but ultimately it's not the same like when a person actually did a sin. So first the Rebbe explains now in His Dalet that there is the level of these three levels, not only when a person actually violated, even by a tzaddik who reaches the level of teshuvah. V'hinei hakavona dalet, kavona bebrias ha'odam hi, the intention of Hashem in creating man, is sheyeh ba'ifun da'asra halikimas adam yasham. The Eibshter created the person straight, which means not to do averis and do tshuva, but to go straight with Hashem. That all of his days he should go in the right way. As the precise language of our rabbis of blessed memory. Who did Hashem consult? Hashem consulted the souls of the tzaddikim. Meaning, when the Eibishter created the world, he consulted the people should be tzaddikim like it. Didn't consult Yidden, didn't consult Baal Tshuva, he just consulted tzaddikim, because that's what the Eibishter wants to Adam Yosha. V'av shebemokim sebali tshuva emdim ein tzaddikim gemurim yichaylim lamed boi, even though that a Baal Tshuva is in a place where great tzaddikim, even completes, can't stand there. So why does Hashem want, how can we say that Hashem wants this Messiah Shel Tzaddikim, but isn't the level of Baal Tshuva much higher that a Tzaddik Gomer can't even stand over there? How do you do it? But it's known, so it's known that Tshuva is not just for sins. But Tshuva means to bring back the soul to its root and source. Tshuva has to be to reach the level of tzaddikim gemurim yichayim lamed by a higher level. Doesn't have to be through sins. Can be with Adam Yashar. The hashavas hanefesh the mekodev v'shosha. The tshuva zu. When you talk about tshuva to bring the source back to the neshama, the nefesh, to its source and root, higam et tzaddikim gemurim. It's also by complete tzaddikim. The fact itself that the neshama is here below, and it's not in the source where it is, that alone, you don't have to do Averis, but the fact that the neshama is here below and not in the source Shazo Mekoim Ha'amiti, the real place is the source above. Especially considering that when the neshama is below in Olam Hazeh, that's actually exile. It's not the place, it's an exile for the soul. So you have to bring it back to its place. And when we talk about that Baal Tshuva has great tzaddikim gemurim, the b'mokim shebal Tshuva emdim em tzaddikim gemurim mechaylum lamed boy. So we said that there's the place where Baal Tshuva stands, complete tzaddikim can't stand it, which means it's a higher level. To that level, you don't have to do Avedas to reach. Ugam b'tshuva zu tzaddikim. Also, this tshuva bringing the soul back to its source. The purpose of the descent of the neshama in this physical world, is for that tshuva. It's not for the person to do literal avedas. It's to return when we say nimlach b'neshuzim shel tzadikim. Yes, and the tzadikim should bring their neshama back to the sheidush shemakim. Because all the three advantages that we talked about before in tshuva kipshuta really apply to even the level of tshuva. When you're a tzaddik, you did not really err and make a mistake and do an avera, as the Rebbe will explain. And yet, the Rebbe says it's not as chiddush as it is when you actually do an avera. But you know, so first the Rebbe is going to explain the three aspects as it is with the neshama, bringing back the neshama to its source by a tzaddik in his level of tshuva. You know, the gimel, ma'ilus hanal, shebebale tshuva al tzaddikim gemurim. The three above mentioned advantages that bale tshuva have over tzaddikim gemurim, hem gam b'haneshama k'nasis bal tshuva al yidei yiridos lamata. They also apply to the neshama when it became a bal tshuva through its descent below. Relative to what it was before the descent, that it was a tzaddik. So the three advantages that we enumerated before, we can find them in the neshama when it returns to its source in the level of a tzaddik. And the Rebbe explains, the mikivon shegam harichuk shemitzad yirid neshama lamata. Since also the distance that is because of the descent below, even without ever violating a sin, is a tremendous distance to the extent that it's such a distance coming down in Olam Hazeh, he bechinas golus mamash genau, some level golus. So the first point number one that we said before by Abal Tshuva, that distance alone that you are so far away awakes in the person a tremendous thirst. That's number one. The second point was also the delight and the joy of Hashem in the closeness. That comes after the further in, as we gave the mashal the Ben HaMelech, coming from Shivyu Taina Gadol B'Yesir is a tremendous level of delight. Also, similarly, that third aspect, the novelty that Tshuva accomplishes, the change, the Mekibon She'inyan HaTshuva Gam Tshuva the Tzadikim, since the idea of Tshuva, even the Tshuva Tzadikim, that he's bitter over his condition, that he's distant from godliness. He wants to leave his situation and his mitzias. Asura Mikani wants to leave there. This is a idea of a chiddush. This is a novelty. This is a change. This is called a change because you are changing, bitter about your situation, that you're so far away and you want to come to Hashem, get out of there. That's considered a change from where you are. So while we're saying that the Mokum Shabbat Tshuva can even be applied in the case of a tzaddik who is doing teshuva, the neshama bringing it back. Still, it doesn't reach. Since we could say that this saying of our sages does not really leave its simple meaning that a Baal Tshuva means for Avedis. Somebody did Avedis and he's doing Tshuva. This that they said that the place of Baal Tshuva, even complete tzaddikim can't stand there. This is mainly in literal Baal Tshuvas. The Rebbe explained this. The Baal Tshuva who be Baal Tshuva kipshutam. The reason why the main advantage of Baal Tshuva is in a little Baal Tshuva is in that third level who be Mailas Achidush Tshuva. That's the advantage of the novelty that takes place through Tshuva. That's not so much by the neshama returning from its yearning of its distance to the Chidush when a person changes around when he does Tshuva for Averis Kipshuta. And the Rebbe explained, the B'mailas ha'tshemā and Ub'mailas the Kiruv Shalach Re'arichut, in the advantage of the thirst that you thirst to Hashem and the Maila that you get close after you were distant, there's not such a big difference between you really a tzaddik or you actually did an Avera. In both cases, there is a greater tzimoin, and in both cases, even if you didn't do the Avera, there's the tremendous delight of becoming close after the distance. The fact that their main advantage of tshuva is literal tshuva, that's the advantage that tshuva has, that it's a novel, that it's new. That is mainly about tshuva literally from Averis. But the idea is, why not this level that he's bitter about his situation? Why could that not be considered a novelty? But the tzaddikim, mikivon shenishmosum ira etzlam begilui, since their soul shines by them openly, so their bitterness is because their distance from godliness. So their bitterness, even though it's a very strong bitterness for being distant from godliness, to the extent that that bitterness touches till the soul, that's not such a surprise. So, therefore, this isn't really something new. So vagam the inyan tshuva sheyetzim mitzius shaloi. So even though tshuva is that he goes out of his mitzius, mekomakim mikivon shan neshama betiva roitza lamalis ritzen koino. But since naturally the neshama wishes to fulfill the wishes of Hashem, vakavona shalamai lo ritzen koino. And what is the kavan of above? Well, Hashem won't be readers on neshama begufi. When the neshama descends to the body, love el tshuva is that it should come to tshuva. Harei beharatzin shemitzat teva neshama lemalis retzein kaino. So it turns out that this is the nature, from the perspective of the nature of a neshama, that it wants to do what Hashem wants. Nichlal gam hayitziyah b'mitzius shal de'atshuva. That includes also going out of your mitzias that comes through tshuva. So the rotzin l'chatchila that Hashem wants is to leave the mitzias. So this is part of the rotzin Hashem. That's if you're doing teshuva in the level of a tzaddik, mash'enkim b'tshuva kipshuta, as opposed to tshuva literally mekiv on shemekoidem lifnei tshuva. Since beforehand, before the tshuva, hoyo. He was in such a situation that he didn't do what Hashem wanted. He did sins intentionally. So he went beferish against the rotzen, against the nature, against what originally what he's supposed to be, because he did averis intentionally. So when you do tshuva later on, it's not a continuation, it's something new. So it becomes a totally new mitzvah through tshuva. So while the Rebbe says we have technically these three levels, even by tshuva of a tzaddik, but this third level, the advantage of changing yourself around, only takes place by literally about tshuva. Because by a tzaddik, in the end of the day, it's all fulfilling Hashem's will, so it's a hemshech, even though you're going out of your mitzias, but this is a hemshech from your previous mitzias, because this is the Ratzon Hashem. Only by tshuva, literally for Averis, of which you violated the Ratzon Hashem, and now you came back, that's a change in the mitzias. So that third level really applies to tshuva, literally to tshuva. Hey, now the Rebbe is going to go to explain, this is the way it is in the Nefesh Ha'odom, returning the three levels, really tshuva, through Avedis tshuva by a tzaddik, how we have the three levels. The Rebbe is going to explain how we also have these three levels in the tshuva of the items that are nitzutzes, that you're maila, and bringing them back to the source. We also have these three levels. It's also in the tshuva when we return the sparks that are in physical matters to their source. Also in this teshuva, when bringing back the nitzotzes, they are similar to the three aspects that we're talking about in tshuva of the nefesh, of the neshama to its source. Aleph, you have ha'tshimoin va'atshuka da nitzotzes mitzad shorsha. The thirst and the yearning of the nitzotzes because of their root. Lalis miridosa v'lachzer l'shorsham, to go up from their descent and to go up to their root. Valderach, this would be similar to the saying of the sages that mayim tachtoinim boichin anon ba'inol lemeve kodam alka. The water, after the Eberster separated the waters, mavdil bein mayim lemayim, so the lower waters were crying, we want to be before Hashem, we want to be in the upper level. The nitzotzes that come down, they want to go up because they have the yearning and the tzemoin, they want to be up by their source. So that's one aspect of bringing it back. There's a great tzemoin of the nitzotzes to go up. Base. Simchat, the great joy, the great joy that happened through the elevation of the sparks and going back to their source after they were distant. So they were away and they're coming back, like the Ben Melech we gave before, the Gabi the Neshama. Coming back. The Gimel, and number 3, since the sparks that have fallen to Klippas, even if it's only Klippas Noiga, their light has been extinguished. So from their condition, so it doesn't really fit that they should be sorted out and elevated to the source. They're no longer shining. There's no light there. But now, when they are verified and they go up to the root, the person brings them up. That's considered, that's a chiddush. And the Rebbe says now that the chiddush of returning the nitzotzes is in a way greater than the chiddush of tshuva, little tshuva. Yesh loymar, that this chiddush, the novelty in returning the nitzotzes, is a greater chiddush than the chiddush of tshuva. That will explain to us why Maisim Tovim in a way, are greater than tshuva because this is a greater chiddush of the nitzutzis. The b'tshuva kipshuta, literal tshuva, av shelifnei tshuva. Hoya b'matzev kazeh shelo asur tzena kodesh baruch kanal. Even though that before tshuva, he was in such a condition that he didn't do the will of Hashem. I said before, hayrezo rak moshe b'chitzoni is that was only external. Av l'ritzoni hamiti. But the true desire of a yid at any time, kamos, even at the time when he violated, even then, was to fulfill the wishes of Hashem. As the known ruling of the Rambam, that it says Reitzani, that's that's his Rotzen Hamiti. That Rotzen was in total obscurity. Until the revelation is something like a novelty. As opposed to the tshuva that is through returning the nitzutzos over there, it's never really new because the inner rotzen of a person is always to be connected. Wants to do the Eibishter's will, but the tshuva tzutz. But in the case of bringing back nitzutzos lemekoidom, since the nitzitzes that fell in the klippas, even in klippas noiga, their light has been darkened. They're not light at all. So then their elevation is really a chiddush. So therefore, in the returning the nitzutzis to their soul, there's the source, there's a greater chiddush than returning the neshama. So the Maisim Tovim have an advantage over the tshuva because the Maisim Tovim bring back an extinguished light and bring it back into the light again, which is a greater chiddush. And that point, this is the greatest. But the Rebbe continues now in Ois Vav, but in the point of Tzimoin, Adrabe, over there, the tzimoin of tshuva, either the person or vatzadik or about tshuva, is greater than the tzimoin of the maisim tovim. So over there, the level of tshuva is greater, as the Rebbe will continue to explain. Oisvov. Vov. Omnam inyan zeh, this idea that there is an advantage in tshuva hal ilu ba'at tshuva da'achzoras hanitzutzos, in the tshuva of achzoras hanitzutzos more than the tshuva of the neshama coming back to its source. That's as far as the advantage of chidush that tshuva has, the renewal. There is a greater renewal by nitzutzis than by the neshama, which is always b'pnimius connected to Hashem. It's not really something new. So in that area, maisim tovim, the tshuva, in that area, the tzotzes are higher. As opposed to the advantage of thirst that comes because you were distant. That's mainly in tshuva of the neshama. The neshama's return comes with simoin by Baal tshuva, and both, whether it's tshuva kipshute for Averis or tshuva tzadikim. Hein b'tshuva de tzadikim, whether it's tshuva tzadikim, hein b'tshuva de kipshute. The mekiv on shehi ha'is kashrus the neshomes melukus. He is kashrus amitis, since the tie of neshomes with godliness is a true tie. It's not an essence tie. A tie when two essence, the essence of a neshama is one with the essence of a lakus, like a connection, a tie between a son with a father. Bonim atem Lashem Elikechem. So we are also children. So just the example of a ben and ma'av is fitting to the neshama with Eibishter. She is kashrus atzmis. The son is tied to the father in their essence. There's an essence connection tie over there. When the neshama feels that it's distant from godliness, whether it is by a tzaddik, the descent, because it came down below into this world instead of being lamaila, or umekoshkein richuk, the literal tshuva shalidei avedis, zen negeya la'atzmuso. So that's something which touches the essence. Umemele gam hatzimoin shalidei hergesh harichuk. So therefore, the thirst that comes about through the distance, by feeling the distance, that touches the essence. And also similarly, Ugam Bahat Tainug, in the second aspect, that's the first aspect, Levmot Simoin, and also the pleasure. The second aspect that you have from the return, Ugam Bahat Tainug Ma'akiruv Shabol Achri Harichuk, in the delight that comes in the kiruv that comes after the distance. The mekibon shanishom is heim bonim, since the neshomis are sons, the haben whom atzmius hav, the sons are from the essence of the father. So there is a delight from coming close, a son to the father. So that tainug of the father from the fact that his son got close to him after his distance. Certainly, if we're talking not only a son, but like the Yidden are called a ben yochid, the only son of the Eibishter, who tainug atzmi. This is a tainug of the essence, because there's a kesher, an essence kesher between the father and the son, between the neshama and the Eibishter. Ashein Cain had the post to Hatainu Mikiruv Hanitzoitzes La'acharei Shenisrachku, as opposed to the light from bringing together the sparks after they have been distant. That can be compared not to a father and a son, but to two friends that love each other, that haven't seen each other for a long time. And after they get close and they see each other, they are delighted and they're very happy. This delight, so notwithstanding that it's like a great, great delight, but then that is still similar to other delights that come from outside. It's not the delight of etzem, like a father and a son, like the neshama with the Eibishter. So it turns out that as far as the third aspect of change, chidush, that we have by the sparks that come back to their source, more than the neshama coming back to godliness, returning godliness. But as far as the other two aspects, the yearning and also the delight of the connection that is more by a neshama, more than by nitzutzis. Yes, loisiv, we can add to this. So gam hachidush b'tshuva dachzoros hanitzutzis, in addition to the fact that this is not as strong by the tzotzis like by neshamas, but even that aspect of the chitush, which is in tshuva, dachzoros hanitzotzi, when you bring the tzotzis, bringing back the physical items back to their source, who al yidei the Neshamas Yisrael Davke. This is Davke through Neshamas Yisrael. So it's the Yidden that bring that about through their fulfilling the mitzvahs in physical matters. That's how we bring about that sparks to go back to the source, either to do the mitzvahs or with the physical matter or using the Shem Shemayim. So it turns out that even the Nitzoit says that Chiddush comes through the Neshamas Yisrael. This is similar to what's explained elsewhere. The fact that the power to make for Hashem blessed, is Davke the Neshamas Yisrael, who Kivon since world comes from obscure, it's blocked. Helen v'hester. Olam is Helen v'hester. So the fact that you make it a dira for Hashem, you're making the vessel, that goes against the nature and the definition of the world. Who is chadshus, that's a renewal, because the world is Helen, and you're making it a keli lekus. Just as the renewal of creating an entity from nothing, the world, everything, all creation, is only in the power of Atzmus to change and make a new Metzias. So that's why making a dir b'tachtonim is dafke through the Yidden, because they are connected to Atzmas. Since the neshamas are rooted in Atzmus, that's why this koyach was given to them. So, first of all, the level of chidush that is by the nitzoitzers going back to their source isn't as great as a chidush of the neshamas Yisrael going back to the source. But even the fact that the tzotzes are coming back, that comes through a yid, because only a yid essentially can change around things from what they are, because the chiddush to change things around is only b'koyach ha'atzmus, and therefore a yid who is mushrish be'atzmus has the koyach to affect those changes. So it turns out, according to this, that we have an advantage in actual maisim tovim, the netzoitzes birur, over neshamas Yisrael in the sense that over there is a chidush, and Mashen Kain by Neshamas Yisrael is not a real chiddush, even if we're talking about Shuva Kipshuta, because the Rotzen is only in Chitzonia, so that is the advantage. On the other hand, as far as the yearning and the delight is greater by Neshamas Yisrael, and even the chiddush that Rebbe just explained now, that even the chiddush which is in the nitzoitzes to bring them back, the real chiddush, also takes place through Neshamas Yisrael, because Neshamas Yisrael are the ones that are connected to Atzmus, can affect that. So now that we see that we have both a Maila in Neshamas Yisrael, which would be Tshuva Kipshutei, or Maisim Tovim, which is Nitzutzes, we can explain these two levels, whether tshuva by itself or tshuva ma'asim tovim, depending on which aspect, because there's different areas. In one area, the tshuva of the neshama is greater, so that is tshuva by itself, ma'asim tovim by itself. In the other area, in which the chiddush and the accomplishment of the ma'asim tovim is the chiddush, and that's the area where tshuva is just preparing the ma'asim tovim, because it's through the ma'asim. Let's look inside. So we can now reconcile these two interpretations from the Torah that the Rebbe brought down, that it's better one while in tshuva ma'asim tovim. The lefi pirush echad, according to one pirush, tshuva hi nailis yoser mi ma'asim tovim. Teshuva comes before ma'asim tovim, it's on a higher level of Maisim Tovim. Ulefi Pirush Echad HaTshuva Hi Hagdoma L'Maisim Tovim. Going to the other Pirush, the Tshuva is an introduction, comes before Maisim Tovim. When do we say that Tshuva is greater than the Maisim Tovim? The Tshuva da Neshama Itainu Ga'atzmi Kinal. So when we're talking about the level of Teshuvah, which Tshuva is the Neshama, it's greater than the returning the sparks, is because it's a Tainu Ga'atzmi, because of the connection of a Yid with the Eibishter. Elo, Sha'afal Pikein, Yesh Mailim Maisim Tovim Lekabe Tshuva Mesad HaChidush. But still, there is also an advantage, Maisim Tovim, with regards to the Tshuva, because there is a novelty by taking the sparks that lost their light and bring them back into the connection. So that's why Dafke through this, the Kavon and Direv Tachtonim is the Maisim Tovim, but there is an advantage still in Tshuva. So there is Tshuva, but there's also Maisim Tovim. But then you have the level which Tshuva is not. Tshuva is Hakdoma L'Maisim Tovim, which means that Tshuva is its own thing. Tshuva is Hakdoma, comes before Maisim Tovim. So according to the first shot, Tshuva is greater than Maisim Tovim because Tshuva is Tainuk Atzmi. But there is also an advantage in Maisim Tovim. But then the second shot is that Tshuva is just a Hakdoma L'Maisim Tovim, not independent, but it's just Hakdoma Maisim Tovim. Mikivon who has the power to make for Hashem a dir v'tachtoinos in the neshamas kinal? Lochein b'chdei shehadira shenasa idei ma'isa mitzvos tiye b'shleimus u'begilui. In order that the dira that comes through the ma'isa mitzvah should be fully, complete, and openly, should be ma'asim tovim meirim, while idei kedimas hatshuva. Its introduction, you need tshuva first. Hagilui d'sheirish haneshama, v'ad kimosh meshreshes ba'atzmi, revealing the root of neshama shreshes ba'atzmis. That makes the tshuva ma'asim tovim u'meirim, and that gives the koyach to be a dir v'tachtonim, and that's why that's the hakdama to ma'asim tovim. So the first tshuva is independent, has a maila by itself because skashrus atzmis, and separate there is a maila of teshuva, which is a level of chidush, as the Rebbe explained before, that in the chidush maisim tovim, the netzutzes bringing them back is greater than teshuva. So there is teshuva that's greater, that comes first. Then comes the other one, but two separate. Then you have the tshuva as an introduction to the ma'asim tovim, that in order for the ma'asim tovim to be me'irin and to make the dir v'tachtonim, you need the neshama, so you have the tshuva or ma'asim tovim.